Guess the next problem that we see, easy fix, is this bucket spring. A lot of people will look at this bucket spring, think it looks good, but your cup's just not closing fast enough. It's because they always seem to break right at the very tip. It should be so much longer if you compare the two after you're up here, but this new one just has a lot more spring to it, so your cup closes in time and it doesn't, that last core doesn't fall out and hit the ground. We always keep a spring with us. They're cheap and an easy fix to fix in the field, because if your spring does break farther back and you have to close it with your foot every time, it's not fun. Again, these are the gear wheels. You can see how far it's coming off to the side. It should be running right down the center of this bearing. If you start to see one walk off, I've had guys put it in a vise, hit it back to center, put a tack weld on it. It works fine until you can get a new one. But definitely pay attention to it and then keep your chain tight, because that's what's walking it off. Went through hub bearings already, but you just have that slot in it. Cornstalk stabbed it, broke the seal, which then makes it seize up. Should move very easily, no bumps, grinds. Should be very simple. Might not be able to see this, but this is the head that breaks. It's always down here. When I took this one apart, all 4 of the set screws on the hub bearings were broke. It breaks that weld, which then tilts your probe in, still runs, but nothing's lined up, ends up catching your bucket, wrecking your tip real fast, and you'll just hear a lot of grinding when the probe comes, or the tip comes through your probe. So just keep an eye on those 4 set screws. You can't use Loctite on them because they're so small, but you should be able to see that hub. When your probe goes in the ground, that hub shouldn't move. On something like this, it was probably coming up a 1/4 inch every time and smacking the bottom of the head. Eventually, it's going to break that weld. Probes are pretty simple to know if it's wore. Number one, look at the length. This one has just been worn down. I had people that sharpen them. They'll just put them in a vise and grab a grinder and sharpen them back up. The bad thing we see, the worst thing that can happen, is this opening. Once it gets worn down, dirt's going to build up on the backside all the time. It's still going to take a good core, but that tip's going to just keep opening this a little bit wider every time. Eventually, your ejector rod's going to come out the side of it. Then you have to beat it back with a hammer. But number one, you can tell just by looking at it. Should be tight with a ejector tip, tight the whole way. If you start seeing play, you could put a tip in the end, hold it up. You shouldn't see daylight through it. If you do, then your probe needs to be replaced. And then sand, dirt, no moisture, you can use old probes for a long time. If you get in really mucky situations, you need it to clean out perfectly every time. Otherwise, they'll start gumming up, so that's when you want a new probe and new tip. Ejector rods are, again, pretty easy. Take everything off, roll them on the table. They should be straight. If you are good, you can put them in a vise and bend them back the way you want them. It's just really hard to get this aluminum exactly where it needs to be, but you can sure try. To adjust the ejector rod, which does happen, especially when you put a new hub in, everything's got to be lined up. There are 3 bolts on the bottom side of this black plate. There are 3 bolts on the top. You loosen them up completely. This 19 millimeter lock nut, you loosen up just a little bit, and then you can tap it around with a hammer. If you loosen up all the way, then it's sloppy and you don't know where you're at. Then you just put it on the machine. You cycle the machine slowly using the valves, or if you have a new one, you can use the box. And then you just line it up so this probe or this rod is straight with a probe. I always eye it right off the side of the Wintex because this should be the straight part on the Wintex. So you can eye it off right to the side of it. Takes some time. There's definitely tricks to it, getting everything lined up. You shouldn't hear a knock every time the ejector rod goes into the probe. I mean, it should be pretty clean. On the yellow tower itself, it's kind of, sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's hard, but to know when you're got a twisted tower, this gap up here should be like 4 1/4, and it should be the exact same at the bottom. If your bottom is closed in, opened up, you know you have a twist. I'd say 8 out of 10 times you can put it on your machine, bend it back to where it needs to be. Sometimes you can't. If you can't, then nothing will line up. Your ejector rod's not going to line up into your probe. Your slide that hits this bearing isn't going to line up right. You're going to end up putting parts into a machine, and because the tower is bent, it's going to re-bend those parts. You can also look on the bottom. Probably can't see it, but this cutout, should be vertical. If it's tilted in or out one way or the other, we've never had luck bending something back and being able to use it. We've tried and have not done it. So this line right here should be straight up and down. If it's tilted in or tilted out, we've never been able to get it back to where it needs to be. I would definitely suggest trying. The yellow towers are $1,400, so I mean, if you got something bent, try to bend it back. It's not going to hurt anything, but we just always have a problem when that gets bent.